In every corner of America, there are stories of resilience, innovation, and the unwavering spirit of community. Join us as we showcase the strategies and solutions that are shaping a brighter tomorrow.
Welcome back to The Community Effect, the podcast where we uncover stories, partnerships, and innovations that fuel thriving communities. I'm Marietta Rodriguez, your host, and the president and CEO of NeighborWorks America. Today, we're focusing on one of the most urgent issues facing communities across the country, access to affordable rental housing. But the cost of rent, along with the limited amount of housing stock, has caused a crisis that affects millions. Organizations like Eden Housing are working to provide solutions. Our guest, Linda Mandolini, president of Eden Housing, has been at the forefront of affordable rental housing development and creating housing opportunities in California and beyond. Linda, thank you so much for joining me today.
So excited to be here.
Linda, can you give us an overview of Eden Housing's work and what sets your approach apart from others?
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really fun to talk about our work. So Eden, for those of you who don't know us, we got our start in 1968 through a group of volunteers who came together to work on a project, or actually a ballot initiative in California for open housing. That's what they called fair housing in 1968. And sadly, the ballot initiative failed. But this group of people were so determined that they didn't give up. So they went out and they adopted 6 families and did 6 Habitat for Humanity style houses. Before Habitat was a thing, Eden started doing self-help housing. And the board thought that was so successful working with those families that they went to their second project, which was a 150-unit affordable rental housing project for seniors using HUD financing, the 236 program, which is a very old program. And the board did that as volunteers too. One of them hired the architect, the other one hired the contractor, and they actually paid one of their members $6 an hour to do HUD's paperwork because some things still haven't changed 56 years later. There's still a lot of paperwork in this business, but it was really interesting. It wasn't until the 70s that the board decided to hire a staff person because the city of Hayward was looking for a group on the ground to help them solve their challenges in Alameda County, which is just east of San Francisco. It's home to more than 1 million people. And the city was like, well, we could create our own entity or we could adopt an entity that exists in the community. So they adopted Eden. And they paid our operating budget for several years until we could get off the ground. And they hired a guy named Rick Holliday, who is quite famous here in California for his work, not just at Eden, but also to start bridge housing. And so he was our first executive. And our second executive was Carol Galante, who was the former deputy secretary of HUD and FHA commissioner. And I'm the fourth in line. And we have over the 56 years now that we've been working at this, I think the thing that makes us stand out is we just don't take no for an answer. Much like that first board, we know that housing's a hard challenge. We know that it's hard to do this work, but we believe that you can do it. It just takes a lot of work, and you have to constantly be thinking about all of the components that make housing successful and working on all of those at the same time.
What an incredibly rich history and legacy Eden has, particularly given the challenges that we face today with rising property costs, insurance, interest rates, scarce subsidy. You obviously have been working in California for many, many years. How have you seen the rental housing crisis evolve? Is it just in terms of growth and scale?
Well, I think the challenge with rental housing has been, particularly in the communities closest to big job generators, has been really trying to find ways to build enough housing, ways to effectively and constructively create better density, not high-rise density, but more density, ways to subsidize rent. I think the shortage of Section 8 vouchers has been particularly vexing. But the state, I think, has done a lot of really smart things. One, they have beefed up their zoning and zoning enforcement. So all of our cities have housing elements that they have to plan for how much housing they're going to build. And the Attorney General now has the power to enforce that. So if a city decides they don't want to build housing, the Attorney General starts usually with a letter and then in extreme cases has gone to a lawsuit. And we actually recently saw the governor take away land use authority from a city here in California because they didn't want to do what the state deems to be in the best interest of the state. I mean, if you really want affordable housing, you have to make it possible to build it. And last but certainly not least, if you want affordable housing, you have to invest in it. You're not going to charge someone $1,000 a month and not find a way to subsidize the construction and the ongoing operation of those properties. And I think California has really been putting enormous resources into this, leveraged also by federal resources, the work that NeighborWorks does, the work that HUD does. We've been trying just to maximize our capacity to do this work.
I think I want to unpack this role of subsidy and the importance of subsidy on rental housing. And I think sometimes people who aren't working in housing all the time can have a little jaded response to subsidy. Well, just like, well, no one subsidizes my payments. But the reality of it is the subsidies that are going to make these rental properties more accessible are going to people that they're serving roles in communities that make that community thrive and work, right? We're talking kindergarten teachers, paramedics, people who staff our grocery stores. We need this workforce to be sustainably housed.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually, at this project that we're working on in Livermore, our biggest champions were the owners of the wineries. So Livermore is east of where I sit in my office today. It's a really great community. They are home to a lot of amazing vineyards, Stephen Kent, Wente. There's some very famous wineries out there. And the wine guys can't house their workforce. And tourism is an essential part of that locality's economy. So it's not just the wineries, it's the restaurants. And so we actually had the business community turn out in full force for us at our hearings because they understand clearly that if you don't have wait staff to wait on people in restaurants, if you don't have people to be pouring wine in the wineries and the tasting rooms, you're not going to be able to serve the people that want to spend money in your community. It's all about the economy. But we also had folks from the community college turning out because their students are sleeping in their cars. We had the city itself did a whole grid of their own occupations at the city that qualify for affordable housing. Teachers' assistants, nurses, nursing assistants. Like the list is really long. It's why at Eden, we actually try to do a continuum of affordability from the very lowest end to the sort of higher end of our moderate spectrum to sort of make it possible to have a range of rents for people.
I think that's such a smart strategy of thinking about the continuum, most affordable to moderate, like making sure there's something for everyone on that spectrum.
Can I just also say, we subsidize everybody's housing. If you're a homeowner and you have a mortgage, it's a pretty good bet that you're getting a mortgage interest deduction on your taxes.
True.
Tax subsidies are subsidy. So we actually do subsidize the continuum, and we should. I think that's really important. I think people should be able to build wealth by buying a home. And so I think that these are important subsidies, but everybody should understand if you're going to subsidize owners, we should also think about subsidizing renters.
Agreed.
Because the only way you're going to save enough money to buy a house is if you have a rent that's affordable enough, you got enough room in your budget to save a little extra.
That's absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit about solutions. For example, one of the things Eden Housing is known for is its commitment to preserve affordable housing. Could you walk us through how you approach that, especially given the high cost environment you're in?
Yeah, I think this honestly has been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my career because everybody likes to build new. And in fact, in California, you get more credit for building new than you do for preserving. Literally, when the states look at how are you doing on your housing element, city X, the first thing they count is how many new units you've created. They don't really give you credit for working with Eden and their 40-year-old building trying to do a renovation. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you optimize the programs that we work with to make sure that there's ways to renovate buildings when they get old. I mean, buildings just get old, and it's not just Eden's challenge. We have our colleagues who own SROs and in obsolete forms, right? No private kitchens and baths, and thinking about how you create an investment program that updates and recycles these units so that you keep them, not lose them.
And not lose them. For some of our listeners that may not know the reference SRO, you want to tell us what that?
Sure. Well, that's a single room occupancy hotel. It's when you have a room that you rent. It largely goes to people who, but for that room, would be homeless. And so in their original iterations, they were built really with more congregate bathrooms, kitchens, and they just don't work as effectively for stabilizing people as a single room with a little kitchenette and your own bathroom does. I have one of these in the Eden portfolio that we are, fingers crossed, going to be updating next year, and they're always occupied. So it's a real challenge when you're working in occupied situations to figure out the best ways to rehab, to work around the tenants. I feel like it will be for me like one of my legacies.
One of the key values of NeighborWorks, and I think very much part of Eden's mission, is providing resident support services along with providing housing. Can you share with us how those resident services enhance the overall experience for the renters that live in those communities?
Sure. We've always believed it's not just the building. It's sort of how do you create community and be part of the community? We were one of the original HUD grantees to do service coordination in senior housing. And we started down the path because there were so many seniors who were too frail to live with us, but not frail enough for nursing homes. And they couldn't afford assisted living because there's no subsidy. And so we were part of a demonstration project to see if we could improve the quality of life, both the health outcomes and the socialization outcomes for our seniors, using simply service coordination, where we connect people to resources that already exist in their communities. It was so successful that HUD does it nationally now, and we expanded from seniors to families. And so our work is in really several important places, as NeighborWorks does too. We work on health and wellness, financial literacy and money management, and then also thinking about education, particularly for kids. We do after school and summer enrichment programs. We do tutoring work. And then how do we connect our families and our kids to have access to things that will help them do what they need to do to move their lives forward? I mean, I'm particularly proud of our savings program. We do two kinds of match savings programs. We're part of the national demonstration for the HUD Family Self-Sufficiency Program. And then we have a basic money management program where you can save $1,000. And we got to $1,000 because I was driving along one day and heard on the radio that $1,000 safety net was not something everybody had. And so we said, well, what would happen if we created a program where we could help people just get to the basic safety net?
Linda, you're deeply involved in the business side at Eden. You've committed to working on housing issues and change at the local, state, and national levels. I want to just ask you about one specific thing. In 2018, California passed a multi-billion, with a B, housing bond program with your support. How have these funds impacted your ability to develop and preserve rental homes?
I mean, that money has deployed throughout the state in a whole variety of programs, from rural housing, because, California is a huge state. We have a ton of rural housing, as you well know, at NeighborWorks, because you support a lot of the groups who work in the rural communities. So we had programs for rural housing. We had infrastructure programs, because some of these projects that are in places where you've got to build out transit interface and all of those parts that make higher density housing work. We have a program that invested in that. We have the multifamily housing program, which was really targeted to building more affordable apartments. All of those programs have come to bear. And I think, Eden has nearly 3,000 units in our pipeline. And a lot of it is because those programs are funding some of this pipeline.
As you shared at the beginning of our conversation, Eden Housing has sustained itself over several decades, and you've grown to greater scale. How has that been able to happen? What's the secret sauce of Eden Housing?
Well, I'd say the one thing I really appreciated our founding board member for is he would always tell me that we would not have a mission if we weren't financially sustainable. Like, we couldn't meet our mission if we didn't really think hard about how we grew a robust, sustainable organization, and how we, as we scaled, made sure that we managed our span of control. And that was the word that he would use, the words. And it was really, we have a promise around our brand. And we have to always remember that we're promising to invest in high quality, affordable housing, that we work in a political ecosystem. Land use is the most political thing on the planet, right? And that we can't pretend that ecosystem is going to always do what we need it to do, that we have to be engaged in the conversation around what the policies need to be to make sure that we can not just build the housing, but maintain it for the long term.
I think there's always a need the community expects you to fill. And what I think you're saying is, we've kept our eye on the prize. And I think that's definitely contributed to the sustained success.
I have to give the NeighborWorks Achieving Excellence program a shout out here, because in my 5th year as CEO, I went for my first time to that program and really spent a lot of time thinking about the concepts that Jim Collins from Good to Great really espoused. What are you really good at? And if you're going to branch out from those things, stay with your core competencies. And I think Eden's always been really clear about that. We often get asked to do stuff it's like so far from what we're good at. We're like, that's not us, but we can help you find someone who can do that for you. And even as we think about how do we diversify, we're very clear about what we're good at, which is really high quality, affordable rental housing.
All right, let's look forward at what the future may hold for Eden Housing and the affordable housing movement more broadly. Linda, can you tell us what Eden Housing's goals are for the coming years? And are there any new projects or expansions you're particularly excited about?
We're in the middle of a 10-year strategic plan, which most people don't do. People do 3-year plans now, but we decided to do a 10-year plan because it takes so long to build 2 units in California. We're like, well, it's going to take us 5 years to get stuff into the ground. So we have a goal of 10,000 units in 10 years. And we're on our way to that. It's hard because we rely very much on public subsidy, but we're thinking about pivots, product pivots. Should we be doing different kinds of rental housing? There's been a big push here in California to do student and teacher housing in partnerships with community colleges. So we've been thinking a little bit about, what other kinds of housing. We're seeing a lot of interest in missing middle housing, that 80 to 120 rental crowd. And then we often get asked to think about new concepts. So there's a couple of them that aren't too far from our core competencies that would also meet the mission that we're thinking about.
So you think about the future and the industry sort of stepping back a little bit. What changes do you think are necessary at the community level to continue to expand affordable rental options?
I think we have to come up with ways to build more cost effectively. I think we're particularly challenged in this market. It's just really expensive, right? And so I think, I think about what I'm worried about in the near term. It's cost. I think we've started in California at the community level to identify more places to put the housing. I think we've had for the last 2 decades some very robust partnerships with for-profit developers. And then I think at the other end of the spectrum, I see a lot of interest in more tiny home. Kind of, how do you deal with moving people off the street more quickly? We actually have a couple of projects in California's Home Key program that are permanent supportive housing. So there's a direct grant program from the state of California that helps convert either a hotel, motel, or in our case, a commercial office building into housing for people who are unhoused. I think more thinking about faster solutions.
Yeah, that's point well taken. For our listeners who want to support affordable rental housing efforts, what would you recommend to them?
Some of the most impactful things you can do are just going to your city council and saying, gee, I would love it if you could build some affordable housing in my community. And when you see your elected officials, ask them what they're doing about affordable housing. I think it's easy to click like on Facebook. It's a lot harder to kind of get past that stage and say to people, I really want you to do this. How do we get it done? And there's lots of opportunities to learn about the work. I know the NeighborWorks network is huge. It's in almost every state and Puerto Rico, right? You are in every state and Puerto Rico, right?
And the District of Columbia.
And the District of Columbia. So there's an affiliate out there that's doing this work on the ground that takes volunteers that would be happy to show you the work that we do in the whole range of housing. I mean, that's the beauty of NeighborWorks for me, is that we really are on the ground. And that's really the thing about the Eden board that I like the most. We may not solve all the housing problems for everybody who needs a home, but we're going to do whatever we can, and we're going to make sure that what we do, other people can replicate.
As you know, NeighborWorks has worked on our own strategic plan this year. We've talked a lot about the importance of identifying local needs, resourcing the boots on the ground. Can you talk about what you can do as a local in the community nonprofit and what we can do together? In other words, we each play a different role, and it's when the harmony of both of those come together that can be really, really impactful.
I think the beauty of a network like this is that Eden alone can't move federal policy ever. Like, I can't go to Congress and say, look, you should do this. I can go to my congressional delegation. But I think the beauty of being able to work as a group and have national examples, because no two communities are the same. They might have some common challenges, but people do things differently. And I think the beauty of NeighborWorks is that you have this ability to sort of help us identify what challenges are that we share and come up with solutions.
100%. I think there are always local differences, but probably more similar than you are different.
It's a big country. You're never going to have a one-size-fits-all anything for 50 states. But if you can be a program where you can foster the best of local culture with real solutions that the whole community likes, I mean, what's there not to like about that?
Thank you, Linda, for sharing your incredible insights, your experience with us, for the work that you're doing with Eden Housing to access affordable rental housing, helping advance the mission of NeighborWorks. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to talk to you, and it's great to be part of such an incredibly important network.
Listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Eden Housing or how to start your own journey towards homeownership, be sure to check out the show notes for more information and resources. Community Effectors, thank you for joining us for our conversation today. Remember, the community effect is about empowering people, fostering connections, and creating places where everyone can thrive. We hope this podcast can be one of those places for you. Join us next week as we continue to explore the stories and strategies that are shaping communities we call home. Until then, keep believing in the power of place and the people who make it possible.
This is The Community Effect, brought to you by NeighborWorks America.